Hello there, my name is Mike Talty and I work for Microsoft in the UK, and this is one of a number of short videos on the ActiveTouch site about Silverlight. That's Microsoft's rich internet application technology. Silverlight 4 is the latest release. You can get hold of me via mail, mtalty@microsoft.com. You can find my website at mtalty.com. You can find me on Twitter at mtalty if you want to get in touch using any of those means. And we did make a more kind of overview video around Silverlight development for ActiveTouch, which is at bit.ly/ActiveTouch intro if you want to catch that video. In this video I want to talk about a notion that we have in Silverlight called visual states. And the idea of this is that a control or a piece of UI can have a number of visual states. You can imagine that you might have a UI where you expand and collapse things, that kind of idea, and you can model that with visual states. So we'll just do a very simple example of that here. In order to do it, I'm going to use exclusively, I think here, the Silverlight design tool Expression Blend. So if you want to get tooling for Silverlight, then what you need to do, the easiest way to do it anyway, is to go to http://www.silverlight.net/getstarted. And that will get you the SDKs, free copy of Visual Studio, and a sample copy of Expression Blend 4 so that you can put these things together. The other thing I'm going to use in this video, I think, even though it's not really crucial to the video and I'm not going to make huge use of it, is the Bing Maps control. So it's just a nice control that kind of does some stuff, so it gives me something to put on the screen and show something. And if you want to get hold of that, and you won't have to fill in any registration details or anything like that, we'll just go to http, and this is another bit.ly, and that's Bing Maps SL control. So if you just go there, you'll be able to get that. And once you've got those bits in place, then let's drop into Expression Blend and experiment with those. Okay, so let's just run up Expression Blend 4. And let's make a new simple project in here. So we'll just do File, New Project, and we'll just make a Silverlight application. That should be fine. And then, as I said, I want to use this Bing Maps control. So what I need to do is add a reference to my project for that. So I just go over here, add a reference. My Bing Maps control is in C, Program Files, Bing Maps Silverlight Control version 1. And these are the libraries, so I'm just going to add a reference to those two libraries. That brings the control into my project so that I can then work with it. Over on my assets panel over here then, if I just go and have a look at that and find the locations, we should be able to see that the controls that come in from that maps control assembly that we just brought in, that library we just brought in, shows me all of these fancy controls that come with the Bing Maps. And the only thing I want at the moment is a map, so I'm just going to draw it out onto the design surface there and collapse this panel back down a little bit because it's got a little bit big. So let's just move that back over there for the minute. And or rather, let's just move that back over there and maybe move that over there a little bit. Fine, so let's just size the artboard, and all I'm going to do is take this control and drag it right out to fill the available space. And the other thing I'm going to do just whilst I'm here, let me just go to my objects and timeline, is make sure that the whole control with its properties is set to not have a specific width and height, because I don't want a specific width and height, so I'm just going to specify auto and then just give it a design time width and height, which lets me just manipulate it at design time. So that will now size itself appropriately as and when we're working with it. So imagine I'm just trying to do a simpler UI where I don't want these controls from the map, and so let's just go down to its properties and let's get rid of the Bing logo, and let's get rid of the copyright message, and let's get rid of the navigation controls at the top left. So they've all kind of gone away. And what I want to do is try and put my own controls somewhere on the screen. So we'll just go and mark out a different area on our grid here. So let's just go and try and mark out an area in the bottom right, for instance. It could be in the top left, it wouldn't make any difference. Let's just go and mark out a little area here, do that. And into that area there, what I want to do is put another grid. So we'll just go and find, let me just move these panels around to make this easier for myself. So we'll have one down at the bottom, one at the top. Let's just go and find a grid here. And I'll just double click to insert a grid, or maybe we could draw one out, but we'll double click and then just move that down into the bottom right. And so we've got a grid down in the bottom right, and just so that we can see that really, I'll just give it a little bit of color, so we just make it black or something so we can see it for the minute. Let's work within that grid, so I'll just zoom the UI a little bit so we're just focused on that grid. And what I want to do in this grid is make a little area in the top left. And then I want to make sure, in a second anyway, that this area on the right is sort of automatically sizing itself, so we'll come back to that in a second. But over on the right here, I'm going to put a grid. So we're going to have a grid within a grid, and I'll perhaps use colors just so that we can see what's going on again. So let me insert another grid into this grid. So I'm just double clicking that grid and then picking up the new grid we've just dropped in and dropping it over here on the right. So if I color that differently, let's just go and grab something to color it differently. So it's very obviously a different grid. You can see the grid within the grid. And into that grid, I'm just going to make a couple of rows. So let's go into this grid and give it a couple of rows. There is, I'm just having trouble with the selector. There's the grid there. And I'll put a couple of buttons that we could use to switch the view of the map from road to aerial. So let's just have a couple of buttons. And we'll go for a button there. I won't pretty up these buttons. We could retemplate them and make them look pretty, but we won't. And let's take this button and drop it down into the second row. And what I want to do is just make sure that these grid rows are sizing themselves in automatic sizing. So I just switch them to auto. And you can see that that hasn't really done anything, but it's because of a number of different properties are still set. So I need to make sure that my buttons, for instance, let's just select the two of them and auto size those in both directions. And then I just need to select this grid row and make sure it doesn't have some kind of minimum height set on it, which it does. And this other grid row, and make sure it doesn't have some minimum height on it, which it does. And then if we go back up to the parent grid around these two grids, I want to make sure that this row here is also set to automatically size itself. So you can see now that that grid row is sizing to the buttons. And I also want to make this grid column here automatically size as well to those buttons. Now this has left my buttons feeling a little bit puny, so let's beef up those buttons a little bit just to make them feel a bit better by giving them a bit of margin and a bit of width and height and so on. So let's give them a 12-point margin around there. And let's just make sure that they have a decent width and height in the first place. So perhaps we'll just set them to an actual width and height, maybe something like 128 and maybe something like 36, something like that. So they're quite big buttons. Now one of these buttons I want to have content of road view, and one of these buttons I want to have content of aerial view. They're going to affect the map. Okay, so that's kind of where we are at the moment. What I want to do is have this set of controls only kind of pop out when appropriate. So I want to put something into this grid cell here that you can sort of mouse over in order to show the controls. And we could do anything, we could draw something, we could do whatever we want. Let's just see if I can find a cheap and cheerful shape to put into there that would kind of fit with what I want. I'm not sure if there's a really obvious one. Let's just take a triangle, for instance. So let's just go and take a triangle, and we'll make sure we're in the right grid. So this is the parent grid. Double click to insert a triangle, and I'm just going to select that and just rotate it around a little bit and shrink it down a little bit. Let's just make it something like that. And you know, that's not too bad. I'll just put that in the top left, sort of make it look something like that, and just have it maybe there. And so again, what I want to make sure, let's just set a color on that so we can see it. Let's just clear that selection, find a brush, and we'll make it bright green or something so it's very obvious where it is. So we've got that very obvious control there. What I want to do is make sure again that this parent grid that we're working with sizes now around that triangle. So this grid row wants to be automatically sized, and this grid column wants to be automatically sized. And what I want to do is just make sure again that this grid row, if we look at it, doesn't have a minimum size, and this grid column here doesn't have a minimum size, and it's just reset on both of those. It looks like my triangle has now disappeared. Let's just find our triangle, see what width and height we've got set around that width triangle. Let's give it a width of, I don't know, 30 and a height of 30 or something like that. Make sure it doesn't have any funny margins around it, which it currently does. And so my triangle's now kind of there in place. And so once again, let's just make sure that sizing is correct. If we go right up to the very top grid that we started with, I want to make sure that this column now is automatically sized with no minimum width. And I want to make sure that this row over here is automatically sized, which we can just do here, with no minimum width. Sorry, no minimum height would be the right word to use there. And so finally, over in the bottom, we've got this little panel. I've gone to great lengths to set up some sizing on it, but we've got it sized the way that we want it. Okay, so having set that up, what I want to do is, by default, I don't want this red grid displayed at all. So let's go to the grid and let's just set its visibility to be collapsed. And the whole thing will shrink down there because there's nothing else taking up much space. So that's fine. And then what I want to do really for the UI is define two states, one where this is shown and one where it's not shown. So it's already not shown. Let's go over to our states panel here. And what we do is we define states for the user interface in sets of groups. And so let's add a group here. We'll just call this my state. Oh, let's call it control panel states, something like that, something proper. The idea is that within a group, states are mutually exclusive. But if you had multiple groups, you could be in at most one state from each of those separate groups. So within here we've got mutually exclusive states which we can make. So let's call this one shown, and let's call another one hidden. And we're already in the hidden state actually, as it happens. And what we want to do in the shown state, and if you watch the video about recording animations, you might see some similarities here, because what we're basically doing is recording animations. If we go to the shown state here, then what we want to do is take that grid and change its property so that it's visible. And so if we go back to our states, we've now got hidden and shown, and you can see how that kind of works out in terms of the UI. Now on these states we can define transitions, and it's pretty elaborate as to what you can do here. So for instance, I could say I want a half-second transition between these two states. Now that's just the default transition. I can also define transitions from any state to this one, from this one to the other state, or from this one to any state. So we can get quite elaborate about these transitions, but I won't do that here. So this is half a second transition in both cases. There's a button to switch on and off up here which we've got switched on, which shows you transition preview. And you might notice as we go from one to the other though, nothing really seems to be previewing very well. For this kind of state change that we've got, where we're changing the layout, you need to switch on another option which is called fluid layout. So switch that on, and then you can see that we get a nice transition from one state to the other. We've got that going on. And we can also go and apply easing functions to that, so we could have maybe a back ease or something like that, and we can see how that's working now. It has that kind of snap effect on it. It's quite nice. We could even apply effects. So if we wanted to, we could, well, you know, any one of these things really. We could ripple or something like that. So let's ripple as we go from one to the other, and you can see how that's kind of happening. It feels a little bit over the top to me, so perhaps we'll go back to none on that, and you can again see how that's going to happen. So this is really powerful because we define states for our UIs or our controls, and then we just move the UI into those states. Quite a powerful thing to be able to do. Obviously though, we want that to be able to be interactive, so let's just turn that off, and let me just make sure I set the artboard. Let's just zoom it back down to its default level with control and 0. So how do we make this thing interactive? Well, one way we could do it is by using code. Let's do this with a little bit of code. So let's just go to the grid that contains all this stuff, and let's put some simple event handlers on it. So we'll go to its properties, we'll go to the events tab, and we'll just write some tiny bits of code behind mouse enter. Let's say mouse enters control panel, and we'll just hit return, and that'll generate us a bit of an event handler. We'll just go back to the designer, and mouse leave will have mouse leaves control panel. And in the code editor now, I'm just going to hit F4 to maximize it. So here's our event handlers, and there's an object to interact with that controls these state transitions. So it's called the Visual State Manager, and we can ask it to go to a state. You can do other things with it. Let's give it this control. We want to go to, if you come in, we want to go to shown, and we'll use transitions. And if you leave, we want to go to hidden, and we'll use transitions. So let's do that. So let's go and try that. I'll just hit run or F5 on the function keys. I'm not sure if we ran this before. So what we're hoping is that when we go down there, well, you can see we've got problems with our mouse handling, but if we get it right, we probably need to do a better job of handling the mouse there. But if we get it right and manage to stay within there for long enough, then the mouse enters and the mouse leaves, and you get how that's kind of popping up. Doing this on a mouse handler might not be the best idea. So you can see how that's kind of working. and just do that. So we can make that a little bit better, I think, and we could take the code away in the first instance, and perhaps we could do something better about the mouse handling, because that's a bit frustrating. So let's see what we can do with that. So firstly, I'll just hit F4 to bring the tabs back, and let's just go back to the grid, and I'm going to take those event handlers away. Let's not do this with code, so that goes away, and I'll go to my code editor and just take that code away. So the code's gone. We have no code. And popping back over here, just put that back on the properties window over there. What I perhaps want to do is turn that little green arrow into a checkbox. So let's just go zoom in on that a little bit. Let's just go zoom down to there. And I'll just turn this into a checkbox, a toggle button basically. Let's just go and do that. So we kind of dealt with the issue of being able to template controls in a different video, and that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So let's take this little triangle, and let's just go and say that what this is we're going to make it into a control, and I want to make it into a checkbox. So let's click OK, and let's just wander in now to that control template, which is where we are, and I don't want this content presenter here, so I'm just going to delete that. And we get into an interesting situation in that this is now the template for the checkbox, and checkboxes have states. And currently this thing is in the normal state. And so what I could do is I could say, well, let's have a checked and unchecked state on this checkbox. And what we'll say is that if you are unchecked, so we'll leave things alone. But if you're checked, what I want to do is just rotate this triangle around, so it'll kind of represent going back in. So we just get the polygon here and we'll just spin it around so it kind of points that way. And so once again we have unchecked and we have checked. Let's give that a little bit of a transition time, and so we can see now we've got checked and unchecked on there. Let's put an easing function on it just to make it nice and smooth. And so we're reusing the thing we've just learned about in order to retemplate this checkbox, and now it goes checked and unchecked. That's kind of cool. Let's come out of editing this template, which we can just do by going up here, and switch out of state recording, and I'm just going to hit Control-0 to put my UI back together. And so now what I want to do, of course, is drive that panel popping in and out as we check and uncheck this checkbox. So the way I would do that without writing code is by using something we haven't really covered, and I'll talk about them in another tutorial, but it's a notion we have of behaviors. And I'll just go to behaviors here, and we have this thing called a go-to-state action. And what I would do in this particular case is take one of those, in fact I'd take two of them, and drag them to that checkbox. So that's one and that's another. And if we just go to one of those go-to-state actions, let's go to the properties here. What I want to do perhaps on this action is when the parent control, which is a checkbox, is checked, then I want to go to the state down here, which is shown, and let's just make sure I got that right. When we go on this other one, when we go unchecked, I want to go to the state hidden. So we're just trying to be declarative about this. Let's see if we run that with pressing the function F5 key in the browser. Hopefully we start off unchecked, we click, we're visible. You notice our little checkbox is spinning round as well as it pops that up and pops it back down. So we've got that nice pop-out panel. Obviously it's ugly in terms of its design. That's not really the point here. We've got that panel working the way we want it to work, without writing any kind of code around that sort of behavior. We've got easing functions going on, nice transitions as we go backwards and forwards. We never actually made the two buttons work, road view and aerial view, but it's not very difficult to make the map do that. Perhaps we should just make that happen very quickly. Let's just go and do that. So let's just go to this road view button here. Let's find its properties and events, and on the click we'll just write code for this here. So we'll say on road view, and when we go to the road view, I think we should say, I don't know if the map has a name or not. Let's just give the map a quick name. Go back to the designer, click the map. Just make sure we have the map selected. Let's call it map. That's a good name for a map. Pop back to the code. This .map.mode equals I think it's map mode dot road. We just check that's okay, and then we go back to the designer again. We go to the aerial view button. Let's go to its properties. We'll call this on aerial view, and we'll just steal that piece of code and set that to .aerial is what I'm hoping for. And let's just finally go back over here and maybe take away some of this styling. So if we just go down to the particular area, so perhaps this main grid behind here, we won't make it particularly fancy, but perhaps it could just be a little transparent, so we'll just ramp that down a little bit, make it a little bit more transparent. Perhaps this red grid has served its purpose in being red, so let's just reset its background so it doesn't have anything. And the green triangle for now I guess can stay, perhaps as a green triangle. It's not very pretty, but perhaps we'll leave the green triangle as well alone for now. And so ideally, if we can compile that code, we got that wrong. Let me just go and fix that code as we do that. So we've obviously done that wrong. And that turns out to be my mistake. I thought it was programming an enumeration, but actually we have to create an object for this. And so we have to create one of those. Let's see if we can compile. Let's see if we can run. And so we just have a little UI down there in the bottom. We can click that. We can switch into aerial view. We can switch back into road view. We can click that and pop that back down. But really this wasn't about the maps. It was more about this notion of having visual states and transitions between them and fluid layout that we can all do declaratively in the designer rather than having to write code for that sort of thing. So I hope you get the flavor of that.